Welcome back, everybody, to the lean-to shed build. Last week we did all the framing, link for that is down below, and this week we're starting by paneling the walls on modern builds.
My game plan is to make this lean-to shed look just like my shop. So I'm going to be sheathing this with the same 3/8 inch thick plywood that's on it. I needed to trim about an inch of material off the top of the panels for the front wall, and that's what you see me doing here with my circular saw. Next, I laid out the line where my left door is going to be cut out of this panel. Throughout this process, I used my 48-inch drywall square quite a bit for laying out these lines. I'll leave a link to all the tools, materials, and supplies that I used down in the description below. And now it was time to see if this piece fit.
I think that's perfect. I think that hinge reveal and overlap on the edge is just what we want.
And our door still swung freely.
Super pro.
Here I'm cutting about 1/4 of an inch off of the door panel, that way it's got room for the hinge.
And if I did everything right, there should be room for the hinges to move, and everything looks really awesome. Perfect.
I used 1.5 long outdoor rated coated screws to attach this sheathing to the 2x4 studs behind the plywood. And vertically, I spaced these screws out every 18 or 24 inches. The door panel attached the same way, and I think that it's really cool the way that the grain is going to flow from the door to the wall panel.
Oh, that works great. Let's do that again.
A lot of times when I'm building furniture projects, you see me use a straight edge when I'm cutting with my circular saw, but I'm going to be putting trim over all of my corners, so I've got a little bit more wiggle room than I do with traditional woodworking. As long as you've got really good layout lines, cutting freehand should be no issue. If you're interested in building a lean-to shed like this for yourself, I'll make sure and leave a link down below where I'll have some basic plans with measurements and diagrams to make your build easier. Whenever you're attaching the plywood to the door, it's a good opportunity to make sure that there's no sag in it and it's sitting really square before you lock it in.
This is coming out really great. I love the reveals all the way around. They're pretty consistent, and once this gets trimmed out, it's gonna be even better.
Now it's time to cut the plywood for our two 48-inch side walls. And the cool thing is I just need to trim about 1 inch off the top so it terminates at the same place as the front wall. That is one of the cool things about a 4-foot by 8-foot wide shed is I don't have to do very many rip cuts on this plywood. And here I'm using my power plane on a couple of these 2x4 edges where my framing just popped out a little bit. I want these panels to sit flush, and this was just a quick little step. The top of these panels should sit right in the middle of the horizontal 2x4, that way the next triangular shaped panel that we cut still has meat to screw onto, and a good reference face.
I'm gonna check the fit, but before this can go in, I'll need to cut away a little bit of material where the ledger board extends to be flush with the face of the plywood.
We're eventually gonna cap this roof edge with another 2x4, and it's gonna sandwich this plywood in.
Perfect fit.
This screws in place just like the other pieces, and then it was time to cut the other side.
Solid.
This triangular shaped piece isn't as tall as the one on the other side. I also needed to use my jigsaw to cut out a couple of notches for the 2x4 supports that are running horizontally on the roof. In hindsight, I could have waited to install those 24-inch wide blocking pieces on the roof until after the sheathing and installed it like the other side, but this is still good.
And our trim piece is gonna fix this little indent in the door where I put a little bit of a twist in it. But that's walls done. I think it looks awesome. And our next section is gonna be roof prep.
Here you see me measuring for another rafter piece that I'm gonna cut, this time without any bird's mouth joints, and it's what I'm gonna use to cap off the roof. I cut both ends of this to 8 degrees like in last episode so that they sit plumb.
And I can't see it, but that feels good.
I connected this board with some 3-inch nails, and I'm really happy with how the water is gonna shed off of this side. I did have one nail give me a little trouble though.
This thing is getting beefy. I'll use these scrap boards as blocking pieces in between all of my rafters. I'll mark each of these to fit and then cut them with the circular saw.
These boards are gonna fill in the open space in between the rafters from the outside.
There we go.
I marked each piece in place because I figured there'd be a little bit of inconsistency between each of my rafters, and this would be sure to give me a really snug fit. The 2x4 sits right on top of that plywood piece, and that puts the top of it right in line with my roof rafters. I nailed through the end of the board that I had available on each piece and then toe nailed the opposite side.
We're on our last one. We need to add some more nails. Locked and loaded.
All of these blocking pieces were pretty snug fits. I used my hammer to knock them in place, and I'm pretty happy about that.
A little pro? Maybe even super pro.
I mentioned I was going to be doing this in part 1, and here you see me screwing in the rafters from up underneath the wall plates. This is going to prevent wind from ever lifting it up. I'm going to be using the same 3/4 inch plywood for my roof decking before I put some corrugated sheet metal on top. This will add a lot of rigidity for my roof and add a good substructure for my screws to screw into for the sheet metal.
Feels good.
I cut these plywood panels to width so that they would be meeting in the center of the 2x4 rafters. And each of these pieces need to be about 5 feet long. The original shed wall does flare out just a tiny bit in the back, so I had to cut a little bit of an angle on the top of this piece so that it met and there wasn't a gap on the left side. I made sure that everywhere I was nailing in these deck boards, I was attaching into a 2x4. Afterwards, I went underneath to double check and I reshot anywhere that I missed.
Next step, corrugated metal. Let's do it.
The corrugated sheet metal that I'm using came from Home Depot, and they're in 6-foot by 24-inch wide pieces. The plan is to screw all of these pieces in, and then I'll cut the ends all at once. Each panel needs to overlap at least one full corrugation to make sure that your screws are penetrating through both pieces. This helps ensure that everything stays watertight. And the 1.5-inch long roofing screws that I'm using have a rubber washer on them that act as a gasket once everything is screwed down, preventing water from getting into the screw hole. And I should mention, you want to put screws on the ridges of the corrugation, not in the valleys where the water is going to shed. After this piece was in, I just needed to cut my final piece to width. I'm using a diamond blade on my angle grinder here, and I'm not sure if it's just not great at cutting corrugated metal or if mine was a little bit dull. I was able to get through this piece, but I still switched to a metal abrasive cutting disc in my angle grinder to cut these ends to length. Right now we've got quite the overhang, and I think I only want it to overhang about 1.5 inches. So I just got a scrap 2x4 and I put a chalk line around it, and then I snapped a line that I wanted to cut. I'm using that metal cutting abrasive angle grinder disc now, and it is working way better. I was able to fly through this cut in about 5 minutes. And now my last step on this roof was to apply a little bit of sealant onto the back of a piece of drip edge that I had left over from when I refurbished the shed workshop. I nailed this in place, and that is roof complete. Up next, we've got trim, but first, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor,
Squarespace. Squarespace is your one-stop shop to build your own website or online store, and that has never been easier with their cutting-edge design tools like Blueprint AI. Squarespace's AI-enhanced website builder. Plus, you can get discovered fast with Squarespace's integrated SEO tools. They do all of the complicated back-end work to make sure that you show up more often on search engines, bringing in more customers. With Squarespace Invoices, you get paid faster and can impress clients with on-brand invoices. And streamline your workflow from proposals to contracts to invoices and seamless online payments all in one place. And with Squarespace email campaigns, you've got the tools that you need to engage clients, promote your services, and build your business built in. So to learn more, make sure and follow my link down in the description. That's squarespace.com/modernbuilds. And then when it's time to make your site live, don't forget to use my code ModernBuilds for 10% off your first site, store, or domain through Squarespace. As always, big thanks to Squarespace and you all for watching. Now let's finish up this shed.
It is now time to measure and cut trim for our shed lean-to. I'm using 1x4 trim. This is the same thing that's on the shed workshop. I want everything to match. I want the bottom of these trim boards to be floating off the ground about 1/8 of an inch, just like our plywood panels, but they should sandwich up tight to the top. Adding casing to these corners goes a long way in just making this look finished and pro. And if you'll remember from part 1, I had a couple of pieces of trim that I removed from the shed workshop, and I'll be installing these where the lean-to and shed meet to help blend the old and the new. To finish up this side, I just needed to measure a piece that's going to go horizontally in between my vertical trim, right where my plywood seam is. I had a little bit of a trickier task with my old trim piece on the opposite side wall. As you can tell, the plywood on the workshop has quite a bit of warpage to it, so I used this piece of blocking and a Sharpie to help trace that wonkiness so I could use my jigsaw and scribe that line.
Now let's see how this wonky board fits.
And I was pleasantly surprised.
You know, that's not terrible.
It looks a lot better than a square edge butted up against it.
It looks pretty clean. I'll take it.
Not having a bunch of gaps on that wall is also going to help prevent critters from trying to make nests or get behind the shed between the workshop. And you'll notice that I cut miters on these pieces that go on the top of the door anywhere that there's a hinge opening. These trim boards are great positive stops, making sure that the doors sit flat and they stay closed. This is the exact same as how the front of the workshop is trimmed out.
And now it all stays closed.
And finally, I put one solid trim piece across the whole top.
And that's trim. Complete. Long day.
So here it is, a 4-foot by 8-foot lean-to shed built against my shed workshop. I'm really happy with the quality and the look that we got from this lean-to. I've got a lot of tools and materials that I don't use very often that I want to get out of my small workshop, and storing those things in this lean-to is going to free up a lot of space. I can see this being awesome for gardening supplies and lawn equipment, or just extra storage on the side of your house. I chose not to go crazy with insulation, but if you wanted to, that also would be a really cool option. I'm a real big fan of the metal corrugated roof. It matches the workshop, and after about a year or so, after this new plywood weathers a bit, I'll put on a finish. Not bad.
And I picked up these neat little vents. I thought I could install them up here above that piece of trim, but there's just not enough room in the framing to do it. But next time I'm at Home Depot, I'll pick up a round vent like this to attach to the same spot on either side.
I also plan on building some cool shelves inside.
I'm thinking that the episode where I add storage and an awning down the shed is gonna be something called like Pimp My Workshop or Pimp My Shed. Either way, that'll be coming soon. I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure and like, comment, and subscribe down below, and we'll see you next time on Modern Builds. Bye. Bye, everybody.